Hello, my name is Jonathan Lowell. I am the Engagements and Programs Coordinator for Planet Texas 2050, a research initiative at the University of Texas with the goal of being of service towards making the state of Texas more resilient and equitable. We do this by undertaking interdisciplinary research that aims to make societal impact. As part of that project, we started this series, which we've dubbed Resilience Roundtables, to bring together leaders across the academic, nonprofit, government, advocacy, and artistic sectors. For this academic year, we are exploring the theme of academic community partnerships for adaptation and resilience, where we will hear case studies both nationally and internationally detailing the ways in which academics work with various community partners to build and maintain fruitful relationships and provide actionable research toward making communities more resilient. For this, our first in this year's series, we will hear from the leaders of Texas Target Communities, the premier community engagement program at Texas A&M University, which for decades has been working alongside local governments and community stakeholders to create sustainable communities across Texas. We'll hear specifically about their partnership with the Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, a nonprofit in Houston, to jointly investigate and document persistent vulnerabilities stemming from chronic pollution, natural hazards, as well as chemical and non-chemical stressors. Before we begin, I'd like to read the land acknowledgement that was developed by the program in Native American and Indigenous Studies here at UT. We would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the indigenous lands of Turtle Island, the ancestral name of what was now called North America. Moreover, we would like to acknowledge the Alabama Cusara, Caddo, Carrizo Comecrudo, Coyahuiltecan, Comanche, Kickapoo, Lipan Apache, Tonkawa, and Isleta del Sur Pueblo, and all the American Indian and Indigenous peoples and communities who have been or have become a part of these lands and territories in Texas. And in recognition of the ongoing and cumulative challenges faced by Indigenous peoples in Central Texas and globally, we call upon the University of Texas at Austin to repatriate the ancestral remains held by the Texas Archaeological Research Lab to their Indigenous descendant communities and native lands, to support the transition of the program in Native American and Indigenous studies into a center, and to establish a protocol of research and study on tribal or native lands, and to foster an ethics and practice of engaged scholarship with and for Indigenous peoples and communities, locally and internationally. So I would like to introduce our speakers, and before that, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you'd like to utilize the closed caption option, you should be able to find it at the bottom right hand of your screen, where you can click and have that option of activating those captions. And our format for today is our speakers will be giving about a 45 to 50-minute presentation. We'll have time at the end for Q&A. You're welcome to add questions either in the chat or in the Q&A section. So our speakers, we have Jamie Hicks Masterson, who is the Director of Texas Target Communities and the author of Planning for Community Resilience, a handbook for reducing vulnerabilities to disasters and engaged research for community resilience to climate change. She has also been involved in projects with the Institute for Sustainable Communities, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Center for Coastal Resilience at UNC Chapel Hill. And Dr. John T. Cooper Jr. is Professor of the Practice in the Landscape Architecture and Urban Planning Department at Texas A&M University, as well as the former director of the Texas Target Communities Program. He has served as Assistant Vice President of the Division of Academic and Strategic Collaborations at Texas A&M. He has also directed the FEMA-funded Emergency Preparedness Demonstration Program from 2005 to 2010, and has served on the boards of the Center for Coastal Resilience, the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, and the Bill Anderson Fund. And with that, I turn it over to y'all.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for having us here today. John and I, we're going to kind of tag team this presentation today on our community engaged research rules of thumb, which comes from a book which I'll kind of describe later on. But we've got different resources available to kind of describe some of this work in more detail. To kick us off, I thought it might be good to start off with a video and to give you a taste of this project. And this was developed because of an award we won last year with TEJAS, the Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, a community-based organization in Houston. We won this community engagement award from the Association of State and Association of State and Public Land Grant Universities. So I'm going to go ahead and share this, and hopefully the audio works.
We like to talk a lot about community, how it is that we see it, and this sense of belonging in place. And Heartland Park has something that really resembles what Manchester is for this people. My favorite park is this mural. You start seeing, there's children playing. It looks nice and green and colorful, but the more attention you pay to it, you start seeing that the Houston Ship Channel, there's this huge factory in the back. And the way the children see this factory is like a cloud factory.
Baseline communities, sometimes called environmental justice communities, are just communities that are in close proximity to industrial pursuits. Typically in the types of areas that we operate in Texas, they're often petrochemical, oil and gas companies. The folks that live there are almost exclusively minority-majority communities that are low income. We operate within a lot of the communities up and down the so-called petrochemical corridor.
Texas A&M, they have been a real partner. They've actually included our students and are training them on a lot of environmental research. They'll spend a whole weekend with us, involve the students in doing research.
Y decir, se pueden hacer las cosas, se puede hacer con lo que nos dijeron, nos explicaron, se puede hacer unos parques para que purifiquen el aire.
I want to make sure that we are doing the best to not just do this for research, let's actually make an impact in the community. We need to think of them as the experts because that's really what they are.
We've created a citizen science program, so we're definitely trying to engender a love of learning long term. Texas A&M has been very supportive of these efforts, so if students, high school aged residents go through this program with us, they actually get a citizen science certificate. We're trying to create the next generation of scientists that this seems to be working.
Hey.
We like to talk a lot about community.
I thought that was going to happen. Okay, so that project gives you a little taste, a little preview of what we're going to talk about today. And Texas Target Communities was involved in the community engagement and the relationship building for that research effort. And our program is 30 years old. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary last year. And it's really come from working with small communities across the state to assist them with planning, urban and regional planning, small rural plans. We do a lot of comprehensive plans and other master plans with small communities that can't really afford it. John came on in 2012. And so since that time, we also kind of pivoted the program and refocused it to make sure that it's as participatory as possible. And so the way we work has traditionally been in the classes as service learning or engaged learning opportunities for our planning students and landscape architecture students. And in the last 10 years, we really found that the skill set we have to engage with communities and to develop sort of action-oriented plans and efforts and strategies is useful for research. And so we've been involved in a lot more research projects in the last 10 years. And when John came on, we also crafted and kind of focused in on our mission. And we really wanted to make sure that we were working with higher risk or lower opportunity communities and focusing specifically on equitable and resilient and adaptive strategies and assisting them mitigating different threats that they might face in their community. We've had a pretty good track record over the years, and our students have gone on to win many student awards from the Texas chapter of the American Planning Association. And many of those awards have been lifted up into the professional category and also won national awards for the planning efforts that we have done, most notably in Liberty County and Nolanville, in Rockport, Texas, after Hurricane Harvey. But we've worked in a lot of places and with lots of students and faculty, but most importantly with communities. So we spend a lot of time on the road talking with different residents and stakeholders across different communities. And there's lots of similarities, whether we're in a rural place or an inner city neighborhood. We see very similar needs and challenges across them. And so for today's focus on community engaged research rules of thumb, we just wanted to sort of start with this frame. And I'm sure many of you have seen this before, but that community engagement is kind of in a continuum. It is not just about outreach or informing folks about what you're doing, but we really are striving to hit more on the far end of the spectrum of how can we truly collaborate with our partners and with residents and key stakeholders and local governments, and then how can we also empower them, making sure that this is something that they're delegating and moving forward through their efforts. The book that John Cooper and I, Michelle Meyer, Shannon Van Zandt, and Galen Newman, we all authored is Community Engaged Research for Community Resilience to Climate Change. And in that book, it's really for an academic audience, describing the key challenges of doing this kind of work within the academic context, and the things that institutions can do to help move this kind of work forward. We, within that book, also describe the community engaged approach and like our philosophy and ethics for how we think it should be moving forward. That work is also within a National Academies report. They have a set of guiding principles that they developed that we helped craft called Strengthening Equitable Community Resilience. So a few resources for you there, but within both of those guidance, we talk about 4 questions that researchers, that it might be helpful for researchers to ask themselves throughout your full research project, from pre-proposal to proposal to the actual execution of the project to, afterwards, what happens once the funding is done. And so I'm going to briefly touch on these, and John will kind of expand on them later. But who designs the projects? As it's been the tradition is, researchers have a research question in mind, and they formulate that. And because of the proposal process moves so quickly, typically it's typed up, written, and out the door. But making sure that you have relationships with community partners ahead of time, and that way you can bring them into that proposal writing process, and that they are a part of designing the project altogether. We did that with Tejas, and I'll describe that here in a moment as well. But the next question you can ask yourself is, who holds the knowledge? I think also traditionally, researchers, there's a view that they are kind of bestowing knowledge upon a community. And so we want to think about all the different types of knowledge, the indigenous knowledge, local knowledge that people bring to the table and making sure that we're hearing different voices. So as you're crafting the proposal and the research project, you need to know to some level some of that knowledge and information, or where to go and who to talk to get that knowledge. And then certainly during the actual development of the project itself and the execution of the work. The third question is who benefits, and what we mean by that is, a scientific question. Usually it's to move science forward, and it doesn't necessarily directly benefit the community that you're working with. So making sure that you are crafting it in such a way where there are tangible benefits for the community that is participating. And that can take very different forms, and it can be something that they specifically ask for. They specifically want an action plan, or they specifically want a communications plan. And so making sure that you're nimble and shifting and addressing those things that will benefit not just the broader impacts of science or communities across the US or world, but that specific group of people that you're working with. And then finally, who stays. It is unfortunate once the funding is up, typically we're on to the next thing. We've got additional funding to focus on other efforts. But at the end of the day, the folks that are in the community are the one that are going to be there, and they're going to stay there. And so positioning the project in such a way that community champions and other key stakeholders can take the work forward once the technical, project is over, and then staying in relationship with your partners and continuing to seek additional funding opportunities to move the work forward. Because what we often, and John will probably mention this later, we tell students, communities don't take summer breaks, they don't take spring breaks. And so we want to be mindful of how we can continue the work once the project is over. So those are sort of our kind of guiding questions as we think about projects in research. And when I say who, I think that's the big question, like who are we talking about? We're not just talking about elected officials. We're not just talking about local government. So John is going to describe a little bit more about the who of who we can engage in our projects.
Yeah, so we often get asked to expound on who the who is, right? And so this table illustrates kind of our formula for building the team to partner with on the ground in the places that we work. And so we start with the folks in the middle, sort of the influencers, the people with the reputational and moral capital, if you will. We start with that group. And then we like to engage what we call the movers and shakers. These are the power brokers, the people with the financial and political capital, if you will, the people who have the ability to write checks and make things happen by virtue of their positions. And then most importantly, we want to make sure we engage the folks on the bottommost rung, those folks who tend to be most impacted by the decisions that come out of these types of endeavors. These are the moved and the shaken. They might only have social capital and some form of human capital to invest, but we want to make sure that we engage them in the process of figuring out what questions to ask, what information is relevant, what strategies are most appropriate for the places that we work. And so this is the other thing that this table prompts me to talk about is the fact that the work that we're doing, although by virtue of the practice we've had, we're probably better at it than the average person, but this stuff is not new. We didn't invent it. This table is taken from an organization called MDC. where I worked for 9 years before I came back to Texas A&M in 2012. And MDC is an organization that's been around for about 60 years now. It has a stellar reputation. It's held in high regard for its work in community building. I learned the craft of community building during my time at MDC. And I can tell you, the folks that I work with at MDC learned from their mentors in the civil rights movement. Even when I was in North Carolina, my PhD is from UNC Chapel Hill. And so I left UNC and went to work at MDC. But while I was a doctoral student at UNC Chapel Hill, I spent a lot of time volunteering with the environmental justice groups in there. And so these principles, these ideas, these practices are not new. They require practice to become skilled at it. But just wanted to make that note that this is not rocket science, right? It does take intention, though. What's the next slide? Okay.
And what, John, did you want to say anything more?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So for this project with Tejas, the co-founder and director, Juan Paras, his wife, Ana Paras, we worked very closely with, and they have a team in Houston. Their work has focused for more than 40 years on addressing environmental injustice in and along the Houston Ship Channel. But beyond that, they are known across the United States and internationally. In 2015, Juan received the EJ Champion Award from the Sierra Club, and has been a big player in the environmental justice world for decades now. So when we began working on this project, so kind of to take it back, in 2014, there was an interdisciplinary group of faculty that received some internal funding from our university to go after different research proposals around an environmental grand challenge. And so John and I and Texas Target Communities was a part of that team. And as the sort of community engagement and engage relationship brokers, John reached out to the folks he knew in and around Houston, and one of those was Juan. The researchers had conducted, a GIS analysis of the sort of most socially vulnerable areas in the Houston area and who was impacted by flooding more. So we knew that was, we were gonna steer the project in a sort of flooding focus for Houston. In working and talking with Juan, he suggested we have a community meeting. And within that community meeting, many other things emerged as topics of conversation that folks wanted to discuss. They included air toxics because they are a fence line community and near the ship channel. You'll see, and within the video you saw, there's oil refineries, there's metal crushing facilities, recycling facilities, and rubber manufacturers, all within very close proximity to this neighborhood. This neighborhood is also 98% minority, 82% Latino, Latina, and about 41% less than $25,000 income. So he said, you know what, we've been working in this neighborhood. Let's focus on this neighborhood. Let's focus on flooding, but also the air quality concerns. But also, by the way, we really want you to educate and empower our youth. And so that took us on a different path than we were expecting. And we shifted our focus to make sure we were meeting their needs. I just want to go off on a little tangent here. The picture you see is from a day after Hurricane Harvey. I think it was 2 or 3 days after Harvey. Our whole team and many volunteers within the College of Architecture went down to provide food and a clothing drive at the request of our partner. And they were significantly impacted in Harvey as well. So with Juan and Tejas, they said, like I said, they wanted to work with the youth, and they said there's this great high school called Fur High School just up the road. So we began talking with them, and they had an ag program that was really focused on urban agriculture, and they had an after-school program called the Green Ambassadors. And the two teachers there, Juan Elizondo and David Salazar, were sort of these key, like energetic, excited educators that wanted to really change the way students saw their world and saw the possibilities of a greener neighborhood in a greener world. And so they were already doing a lot of things. They were already planting fruit trees in the community. They had already done like a rain garden and a demonstration site. And so it was a natural fit of, what can we help you do? What do you want more of? And oh, by the way, you know, let's look into some of these challenges within the community as well. So with that, with the projects that we developed with them, it also spun off the fact that they applied for a $10 million XQ Foundation grant and won. So they were one of 10 high schools across the US that received this grant. And they, the whole theme of it was to be the environmental justice high school for the country. And so they did that as a part of our work. So that has been really exciting to see that flourish. The work we did in terms of the research was basically to train high school students and other residents as citizen scientists. And so they went out, collected water, soil, air, and ash samples. They also did a public health survey, which got a 75% response rate, I think primarily because it was youth from the neighborhood and from the community. What we found was significant levels of heavy metals in those samples, as well as negative scores, reduced physical health scores from those surveys. We were able to collect data also at key points because we started working with them in 2014. And we were very mindful that we wanted to continue to work with them beyond any grant. And so we were continuing to go after grant after grant to make sure we could continue to collect this data. So we got data for the 2015 Tax Day floods, 2016 Memorial Day floods, Hurricane Harvey in 2017. And then there was also the ITC fire, which was a plant explosion near there in 2019. And so we were able to capture all of those water, soil, air, ash samples during those events to really document what was going on in this community. Additionally, the students, a big complaint, I think, or a big concern about citizen science is that it's not a valid form of science. So one of the groups of researchers went out to prove that or show that it was valid. And so they did drainage infrastructure quality assessments, and they did it with professional assessors. They did it with a LiDAR assessment tool, and then they also trained the citizen scientists on this assessment tool. And what they found was, yes, these citizen scientists were getting the same types of metrics and scores as the other two forms of data. Through the project, there was many things we did, and many things that we did that were outside of the project scope, you know, attending community events. There was a seed bombing day that we all made seed bombs and threw them out in the fields of parks. There was lots of things to meet the needs, and making sure that we were truly providing a benefit to the things that the community was asking for. They hosted toxic tours for us. We did charrettes and community events with the high school students and other residents. We went about to work with the landscape architecture students on our campus to develop a green infrastructure master plan for the neighborhood. We had the high school students come to campus, take tours. You know, they went to our Yell practice. They did a lot of extra things as a way to connect them to higher education experience as well. And I'll just say before John pops on and talks further about this, that through these different grants we received, there was regular funding going to the partners, $500,000 in total over 5 years to expand their own capacity to do this kind of work. It also resulted in 24 publications, and we leveraged this to go after and receive an NIH Superfund Research Center, which is now on our campus, and it's a big $32 million research center to expand the research around environmental justice work. So a lot of
Hey, Jamie,
things emerged from that.
Go back to the slide before your last slide that showed the the one before.
Before this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say a little bit more about this initiative and illustrate, kind of amplify a couple of other kind of truths about our work. In the photo in the top, in the very left, there's an older guy holding a pamphlet. That's Professor Nasir Garibe. He is an engineering professor who received funding to use this LiDAR technology to assess the infrastructure in this community where these high school students live. And so, as Jamie mentioned, he wanted to test the competency of engaged scholarship. He used graduate students and these high schoolers. We trained the high schoolers to use these instruments to survey the infrastructure in their community. And Nasir found that the high schoolers did as well a job as his graduate students and the LiDAR technology in assessing the quality of the infrastructure. And he used those findings to write a peer-reviewed article. And so I want to make the point that when we work with our faculty partners, our research partners, we emphasize that the rigor of the scholarship, it still has to be high quality, right? Because in the end, these students and their parents will use the information that they gathered to advocate for improvements in their community. And the science has to be right? And when they go to advocate to decision makers and kind of policy makers in their community, they can't be fooled because they were engaged in the science, right? And so that's one thing I want to point out. The other thing I want to point out is in the video you saw and some of these pictures they're hitting, but over the time that we spent working with Tejas, we've gotten at least 5 PhDs out of this work, I would say, probably more than a dozen master's degrees. The photo in the to the right, there's a young man in the middle. His name's Marcus Hendricks, Dr. Marcus Hendricks. He's now a star at the University of Maryland, just coming off a stint with the White House Council on Environmental Justice. And so we are seeding the next generation of scholars of color who come from places who can benefit from their experience. So just wanted to make that point. So now you can go ahead. All right, so in the time that we have left, we thought, in addition to kind of laying out our philosophy, our background, our track record, we thought we'd leave you with these what we call engagement rules of thumb. These are kind of lessons and touchstones that we have documented over time, again, informed by you know, we didn't invent these. These are just things we found true in our practice that we have learned from other people, right? And the first one, most important one, is that we work by invitation only, right? We don't show up in places unless we're invited. And one of the reasons why we do that, one of the main reasons why we do this, typically there's a lot of work to do, right? If you're working on equity and justice, there's a lot of work to do. And usually when a community invites us in, that's a sign that they recognize that the path that they've been on, the way that they've been doing things for years, for generations, is not working out for everyone. And they want to do things differently, right? And so we find that those communities are better positioned, better poised to benefit from the help we can provide, right? And so, and then we look for the people, for the energy, the spark plugs, the champions who we can partner with. And I can say more about not courting politicians, but if someone wants to hear more about it. But yeah, so we work by invitation. And the question I often get is, well, you know, if you don't know anybody, how do you garner an invitation? Jamie mentioned how we got connected to Tejas. Basically what happened there is I was steeped in the environmental justice world in North Carolina and networks, and I reached out to my friends in North Carolina. I said, who in Texas can benefit from the work that we are getting ready to do with Texas Target Communities? And that's how I met Tejas. Over time, we have a reputation such that there's a lot of people come to us by word of mouth. They've heard about the help that we've provided other places, and they want us to come and work with them if possible. And so we have a waiting list. But if you don't have that, my advice is to, you know, wherever you are, make it known the kind of help that you can provide. Well, you can start by, I love what Fred Rogers say, Mr. Rogers Neighborhood says, wherever you are, look for the helpers. And in today's world, with social media, they should be easily to identify. And when you find the helpers, you make it known what you're able to do. I wouldn't go to a place and say, how can I help? Because you might be asked to do things that are out of your comfort zone or out of your expertise area. I'd prefer to go to a place and say, here's what I know how to do, and here's how what I know how to do has helped other places. If you think I could be helpful to you, let me know, right? So that's one thing. Another rule of thumb is we try to establish a covenant with our community partners, a document that outlines kind of roles and expectations. It's clear about who's going to do what and when. We try to show up when we say we're going to show up. We share resources and accolades and attribution, right? We try to get our community partners. We try to make space for our community partners to be recognized as co-authors in papers when appropriate. We let it be known that, you know, faculty, graduate students, you know, it's probably not the best use of their time to show up at a protest, right? And if we schedule a meeting with you, you know, or if we need some information from you, we expect kind of timely response. So it's a document that says we will show humility. We will show there will be mutual respect between us and our partners, right? Number 3, sow seeds of trust. That's about being transparent and accountable. We try not to overpromise. Again, we try to temper expectations on the front end, and we do what we say we're going to do. We don't underperform, right? And if you don't overpromise, it's easy not to underperform, right? So Jamie talked about respecting local culture, indigenous knowledge, right? We enter, again, with humility as co-learners. We recognize that by virtue of our study and experience, there are things that we know, but we recognize that there are things that people know by virtue of being from a place and living in a place, right? And we recognize that we might not agree on everything, but let's try to focus on the things that we can agree on. So we set ground rules and agree to agree, right? People will fight change. That's a whole nother presentation, right? And so we try to zero in on kind of shared understandings of what's worth knowing and doing. and doing the work, taking the time. I think that's on the next slide, but taking the time to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page before we move forward. Next slide. So again, meeting facilitation, prepare in advance, start on time, end on time, leave on a high note. That's just some of you know that from being great teachers. You know, I won't go into any more of that, but it's helpful to have someone who is good at managing a meeting, managing the flow of the meeting. We have found that, you know, again, while researchers tend to discount the ability of citizens to understand, to take in and process information and make sound decisions, we found the opposite to be true, right? And in the case of the high schoolers in Fur and the people that lived around Manchester, they often care more about the results of your work than you do because their lives are at stake, right? Their health is at stake. And so they need it to be right, and they care, and they will take the time to understand the science. Change is a verb, cannot be delivered overnight. You've heard it said that if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go as a group or go together. We believe if you want to go fast, you got to start slow, right? Again, Jamie mentioned this, community issues don't take spring breaks. And, you know, this is a play of quitters never lose and losers never quit. It just simply means that there are some things that over time you have to understand that you need to stop doing, right? Seek to expand capacity and not dependency. One of the challenges we run into with our students is that they often come into a place thinking they know the answers to the question. And sometimes they do know the answers to the questions because they've studied the problems in other places and they have some idea of what a promising strategy might be. And so we have to teach them to resist wanting to do for our community partners and learn how to grow expand their capacity. We want to create more capacity, not dependency. We want to come in and plan to leave, right? You want to show the way and prepare to go. We don't want them to have to depend on us. We want them to work with us to gather the data, to inform their discretions. We want to teach them. We wanted to prep them with the tools and information they need, and then let them do that. And we're always happy to be invited back, right? So prepare to let go, and we welcome an invitation back. And hopefully, when we come back, is to celebrate, right? We found that it's helpful to stop at times to take stock and reflect on how far you've come, and to celebrate that success. Success builds confidence and is contagious. Once people see that there is some, the value proposition is that there is some possibility that circumstances can change, that we can have an impact, more people line up and get on board and believe. You create momentum in that way. And so I can say more about any one or more of these. But Jonathan, I think another thing that Jamie and I have learned over time is that we like to leave more time for questions so that we can go in the direction that the audience wants to go. So if there's something that we've said that you want to hear more about, we're happy to talk about that and just take questions now.
Yeah, if anyone wants to start populating the chat with some questions, our speakers will be happy to respond. And I have one, I guess, if they start to come in. That earlier slide you had around, I liked that sort of spectrum of like the movers and shakers and the moved and the shaken and the people in the middle. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how to navigate the tensions that are inevitable in those relationships around those sort of power dynamics, and like what, like in terms of maintaining status quo versus like change. And you know, I'm sure there's examples of like how those sorts of different kind of motivations and things like that kind of pop up, and I'm curious if there's any strategies for like coming to consensus or dealing with those sorts of differences?
Yeah, well, one of the ways we cut through some of that is by sticking to the by invitation only rule, right? And usually, if we get invited, again, it's to places that have come to some shared understanding of their history, right? And they may not be clear on where they need to go, but they do understand that we can't continue down the path that we're on. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, even with the invitation only rule, we got to do a little kind of below the level work in advance of agreeing to work in a place, right? So we show up and we want to assess the extent to which what we've been told about the place is true. So we've already looked into the organizations that are there. We've already tried to get a sense of the landmines. Fortunately, we've never been thrown out of a place, right? And then, but once we decide we're going to work with a place, one of the first things we do is to create something we call like a state of the community, right? We gather some baseline information about the place, and we present it to the community, and we ask the community, is this accurate? Does this accurately reflect what you know and understand about this place? And then we try to come to again some shared understanding of the baseline before we figure out, all right, where do we need to go from here? And if there are issues that are divisive, even if they're just below the surface, we want to try to draw those out. And we find that it's best to do those early to acknowledge that there might be some division, but again, we try to zero in on those points of agreement, not so much the points of a departure. That's what agreeing to agree is about.
And one thing we do often, especially if we know there's different interests in the room, is get on the same page about what we love and value about the community we're working with. And so when, as each person is describing, why they're here and what they love about their community, it all ends up being the same thing, and folks will say, I want a place that's, safe for my kids and grandkids to live, well, yeah, that we can all agree on that. And so you see that shared love for the place and the community first. And then I think that sets sort of like that positive tone. The other thing we do is we set ground rules as a group of how we want to work together. And we agree on those ground rules, and we try to, abide by them at every meeting as well. And so typically one of those ground rules that we have is to discuss the undiscussable. So not necessarily shying away from conflict, right? But being open to discuss some of the things that are going to be challenging, obviously in a respectful way. But those are a couple of other things as well.
Thank you. So we have a couple of questions have come in. Go ahead and read them. Suzanne Pierce asks, I'm interested to know how you both imagine the future approaches and techniques that may be supported by technology. What do you see as challenges and transformative possibilities for tech-supported participatory methods?
Yeah, Jamie, we had to adapt during COVID, right? When we weren't allowed to have face-to-face meetings. You want to talk about kind of what approaches you employed during those times?
Yeah, we did some different things. We did some Facebook Live events. We now use regularly a virtual engagement platform called Social Pinpoint. There's others that are out there too. Some of the names are escaping me, but that one is it's a similar kind of format that we might use in a community meeting. There's map functions and has a social media kind of feel where you can add comments and people can like them. We also have used a texting app called Hello Lamppost. And that has also been really helpful for for those who would prefer to text. Now, not everyone trusts like, oh, there's AI or somebody texting me back, some different responses. So it just depends on, I think, the audience and the community that you're working with. But those have been pretty good. Now we're going to get a different type of audience. Typically at our in-person audiences, we do have older populations or those with a little bit more time sometimes. So in some ways, the technology has helped us tap into younger populations or those who aren't as inclined to like go to an actual meeting in person. So I think a mixed method kind of approach. But in COVID, we also did do lots of mail outs and mail surveys and trying to get paper forms in their hands as well, to make sure we were still hitting those that were a little more tech averse as well.
Yeah, I see the question from Catherine about how we work with community members who definitely want to see positive environmental change, but maybe employed by some of the industrial causes of the pollution and don't want to see their livelihoods threatening. Yeah, that's happened. I can tell you in the Manchester neighborhood, there was one day we were out collecting surface samples, and the Valero fire truck was all decorated in Christmas lights and tinsel, and they were throwing candy around the neighborhood. So it's not just the employees, it's the companies that are trying to engender, kind of build some kind of loyalty with the people that they're polluting. And I can tell you, I am encouraged more so by new generations of workers. I was invited to speak to a Society of Petroleum Engineers because their younger employees are uncomfortable with the kind of the process of just extracting resources from a community without leaving anything behind. And so they were really buying into this idea of the social license to operate. That is, what is our commitment to, what is our responsibility to the places where we're extracting resources? Are we responsible for doing the most to make sure we mitigate the impacts of these disasters? And I have been in community meetings, hosting community meetings where people who work for some of these, as a matter of fact, I was at one 2 weeks ago. ExxonMobil is wanting to store carbon under the land of landowners, rural landowners. And there was a person who works for the industry and said, look, I benefit from this, but I'm thinking more about the generations of my descendants who I want to leave this land to. And I'm thinking about having to sleep at night, thinking about the damage to property and the health and, the wells of my neighbors who feed their livestock and maybe themselves. And so people's their conscience is struggling with this. And so, and I can say, this may be a skeptical audience, but I can tell you in my relationships, I haven't run into people that work for the industries who don't want to do better if they can find a way. Right. And so my job is to try to figure out where the opportunities are, where the avenues are to do better.
Yeah. And I don't know how much more I can add, but it's a real struggle for those places because on the day to day, your income is, very important for your family and your livelihood. So in some of the communities we worked with and some of the current ones right now, you see that they're grappling with that as a big challenge, almost an existential crisis of how to go about doing it. But I think if everyone has the light, you know, the focus, the what they want for the future of their community as the light that they're headed toward, a cleaner, safer, you know, environment and place to live, then okay, can we work with industry to pivot and change things in such a way that can get us there? You know, it's not going to be a drastic, you know, the industry is no longer there, most likely, but in what ways can we work together to work toward that?
Thank you. Francis, I saw you raise your hand. Do you want to speak? Francis Acuna from Go Austin Vamos Austin.
Hi, I had a question, and I didn't write it because my mind doesn't want to write right now. But have you had to deal with issues like the movers and shakers and all of these residents that are in great need, that whenever you have limited amount of funds passing through to support them, it's like, why didn't you choose me? Why didn't, you know, all of this disbelief and all of this, it starts making all this unwanted criticism from, I guess, and I understand they're talking from their experience and they're talking from their needs and they're talking from, you know, all of these things that we wish we could be able to address. But yeah, there's no funds. How do you calm the ocean when it's, you know, bursting out?
You know, that's a deep question, Francis.
Yes.
And I can say, you know, often, especially in rural places where we show up, we discover that there might be an old guard of power brokers who with deep kind of long divisions and grievances against the folks that they see on the other side, and they are dug in, right? And no matter what, they're not going to give. In those places, I tend to want to identify the next generation, right? There was a project that I worked on in Danville, Virginia. The project is done now, but it was called Middleborough 4, and it was just dealing with that. It was recognizing that there haven't been enough funerals in this place, and the people who have been fighting for a couple decades are still the power brokers. And so we had to figure out a way to train up the next generation of folks, and we deferred to some of the old guard to help them select the new generation. But once we got the new generation, we work with them to see their commonalities, their common humanity, right? And we work to help them understand that they were better together, and that, you know, the rising tide lift, all those kind of things. And so that's how we were able to overcome it. And even still, we recognize that there were people who would be saboteurs, or people who would join us in the beginning, but find some reason to break off, right? And we would say to them, okay, we understand you have to leave now, but we welcome you back, you know, if you change your mind. Just don't get in our way, right? And that rule of thumb about politicians is, you know, inevitably when I go to a small place, they say, look, we could accomplish a lot more if we can just get our politicians to support us, get behind us. And I would say to them, don't worry about the politicians, because politicians, more than anything, most, I should say, not all, I don't know if there are any politicians on here, but most just want to get reelected, right? And if they see you over here organizing yourselves, they will want to somehow position themselves to be able to say that they're your leader. So don't worry about them. Go about organizing yourselves around your common humanity and your shared goals for a better life for everyone in the community. And the politicians will be knocking at your door.
Thank you.
We are just about at time, but there's one more quick question if folks might start peeling off, but if you have a couple more minutes. And just wanting to share from Heidi, just wanting to share a little bit more about how the community supported how in their policy advocacy, any successes, challenges, lessons learned along the way. If you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Heidi, I have been involved in my prior work. I was part of a project funded by the Kellogg Foundation called Rural People, Rural Policy. Its aim was to work with networks of kind of rural organizations and grassroots organizations to help them understand the basics of policy framing and policy writing that they can then use to advocate to decision makers. I think for us, we try not to we try to stay in our lane on that. We realize that there are people who specialize in messaging and communication that we try to lead with. We try to feed them the information that they can craft messages with, but we certainly recognize the importance of policy framing and messaging. And we see ourselves as brokers of relationships to help people again, figure out what questions to ask and figure out what's worth knowing and what's worth communicating. And then we lean on the kind of the communication specialist to polish it up, I guess. I don't know if
Can you repeat that organization again, John?
Which one?
The one you mentioned, was it
I was just talking about a prior project I was on that was funded by the Kellogg Foundation. Rural People, Rural Policy. That was 10 years ago, but there's probably some lessons from it out there. You know, the people who took it over after I left, funny thing, I got off the project when I came to A&M, right? So I left MDC to come to A&M, and then I was off the project. But the Center for Rural Strategies, the people who do the Daily Yonder, are the folks who took over that project. And I bet if you go to the Daily Yonder website or reach out to the Daily Yonder, someone will be able to point you to the lessons learned from the Kellogg Foundation funded Rural People, Rural Policy project.
Great, thank you. So I guess we are at time. People are peeling off. I want to thank both Dr. Cooper and Jamie for the great presentation. Really insightful, really helpful. And also just, I put it in the chat, but our next roundtable will be in November on Collaborative Communities for Energy Justice, which is out of the University of Pennsylvania Environmental Humanities Program. So if you'd like to register for that, please do. We'll send out the recording and resources and links for next month's presentation in the post email. And thanks to all of y'all for attending.